Okay, today we're going to be talking about sustainable gardening, and what that means generally is that you don't get yourself back in the corner where you have to bring in a tractor and haul away your whole garden and start over again. That's happened to me. So now we're trying real hard to make sure people don't run into that same problem. How many here haven't been to my soil class before? Okay, there's a few people. So I'll try to do a real quick review on that. It's never quick, but we'll try. So for 4 years we were next to an organic farm, and they said this was the best soil they had ever farmed on. And it's called sandy loam. Generally speaking, and when we've analyzed it, the way to analyze, well, let's talk a little more about this first. There's very little organic matter in here. Now, in general, University of California, Davis will tell you that the ideal farm soil is about 1% organic, 99% mineral. So the worst thing that we do nowadays is amend the soil with organic matter. It just doesn't work well at all. It actually it takes you to the wrong place. And unfortunately, our industry is not backing down on that. They keep blindly telling people that if you add organic matter to the soil, it will improve it. Where in actuality, it probably does it does the exact opposite. Organic matter, let's put it this way, dead plants or dead things do not belong buried in your dirt. That's not what nature intended. So first, let's do a little thing on what plants are actually needing. Take a typical plant. When I was a kid, we were told that the roots of a plant or a tree mirror the branches of the tree. They go just as deep as the branches go up. Well, that's not true at all, because the roots can't breathe deep in the ground. So there's a couple things that plant roots are needing from the dirt. So number one is a source of moisture. So generally, if a plant is green and it's got leaves on it and it's functioning, the plant itself up here is fairly covered with wax. So the only time it really loses water is when the little holes in the leaves are open. It's bringing carbon dioxide in, oxygen goes out, water goes out of the holes in the leaves and it dries. It's taking water in through the roots. The roots are not covered with wax, so the roots have to be in contact with soil that contains moisture. So the soil has to be moist. In order to do that, it's got to be porous. So the more porous the soil is, the more moisture it holds. We know the journalists have it wrong. They keep telling you, well, the soil breathes, or the clay breathes, it's porous. No, the clay is porous because it holds a lot of water. It's got a lot of pore spaces. Number two is the variability or the exchange of air. So the leaves take in carbon dioxide and the roots bring up water and they create oxygen from that combination. But the only parts of the plant that create oxygen are the green chloroplasts within the cells of the green parts of the plant. The rest of the plant uses oxygen. Just like we use oxygen to do our things, the rest of the plant uses oxygen. And the roots need it too. And the only way it's going to get to the roots is to go through the soil. So we have a oxygen conducting system in our body. It's called our blood system. So the blood takes the oxygen from the lungs all the way to the extremities of your body. Plants don't have that. So the oxygen goes out the leaves into the atmosphere. The atmosphere has to get through the soil particles to the roots. And the more airflow you can get to the roots, the more permeable the soil is. So the permeable and porous. Those are the main two things the roots have to be, the soil has to be for a plant. Insulation is awful important because the roots operate at a narrow range of temperatures. A living, functioning root is like 34 degrees to about 86. Above that, it burns up. Below that it freezes. So you really have to, your soil has to be a good insulator. And number 4, the soil's got to be stable. You don't want your tree falling over, your plants falling over. It's got to be stable. We've taken nutrients out of there because the soil for most plants is not the source of nutrition. It's just their home. Your home is everything like this happens in your house. You don't eat your house. And plants don't eat their soil in general. They don't eat their soil. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So how does the soil provide that? Well, the soil itself, a good soil we would call loam. And loam means that the soil contains the major particles, sand, silt, and clay. Well, you all know what sand is. That's, sand basically, as a result of the rocks from the hills going through riverbed, they get tumbled around in there. They come out fairly round. So you go to the beach, you see all this fairly round pieces. That's why it's so hard to walk on the beach. You can't get anywhere because the sand's moving, because the particles are fairly round. Silt is actually just little chunks of the sand that break off of it. So they're also fairly round but smaller. And clay are little flakes, like confetti. They're microscopic. Now, where did all this come from? I'm not sure if this is granite or not, but soil is made out of granite. So granite, you've seen what granite countertops look like. The white areas of the granite are quartz, silicon dioxide, the same thing as glass. So it's a crystal called quartz. Sand and silt are basically quartz. So the soil is, and clay is a mixture of quartz. The dark specks in granite become the clay. They're called feldspar, where in the rock. It's a mixture of quartz, silicon dioxide, and either aluminum, magnesium, or some of the other metals. And it creates these flakes. Instead of a crystal like these, it's more flaky, and that becomes the clay. So you grind up a piece of granite, which is the major rock on the earth, you get loam. That's what loam is. It's a rock that's been ground up by the rivers and action of frost and all that. So that's your soil. You don't take a tree and grind it up and call it dirt, but that's what the industry is doing right now. So the way these things provide this, well, if you have nothing but sand, well, any round object, sand and silt are fairly round. Anytime you have a sphere, the gaps between the solid particles makes up about, according to physics, about 1/3 of the volume. So if you just had sand and silt in your soil, it'd be 1/3 air spaces. And the bigger the air spaces, the larger in diameter, the easier it is for the atoms of air to go through it, or the molecules of air to go through it. So the bigger the spaces, the better the permeability. So sand itself is very porous, and it is, if you had pure sand, it would be roughly 33% airspace and very free-flowing airspace. Now, we can't live in sand. We need too much oxygen, so we'd still suffocate if you buried us in sand. But plant roots get enough air out of the sand. Now, you can see the clay. So on this thing, the tennis balls, and they should be actually for, if they're true relative sizes, the sand would be more like bowling balls or beach ball size. And then the ping pong balls in here are supposed to be the silt. And then the lentil siege and confetti would probably be a little better representation, would be the clay. The clay has actually more air spaces around it than the sand does. It's a smaller particle. However, the spaces are so small that it's hard for air to get through clay. Now, the way it holds water is that if you look at soil underneath the magnifying glass, you will notice that each particle, and if you grab soil, especially right now after the rains last week, you put underneath a microscope, you'll notice that the soil particles gleam. And that's because each one has got a layer of water molecules around it. Soil's got a negative charge, and water, let's draw a water molecule here. Water is oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms. The oxygen's got a negative charge, the hydrogen's got a positive charge. It's an ionic particle, which means it's charged particle. The side with the hydrogen sticks onto that rock really securely, at least 1 molecule thick, and it'll hold several layers of water fairly easily unless a plant pulls it off. But that last layer of water is really stuck on there hard because it's charged. Silt has the same layer of water, but silt's a smaller particle, so you can see more of the silt is holding water, and clay being the smallest particle. They say clay can be as thin as 28 molecules thick, and it's holding a layer 1 molecule thick of water all around it. So clay holds a lot more water than sand. Sand might be several thousand molecules thick. Still, it's only holding 1 molecule of water. So what we know about the soils, if you've got a foot thick layer of sand and it's totally dry, about ½ inch or a little more of water will be able to coat all those sand particles a foot deep. If it's clay, it'll be over 2 inches of water to coat all the clay particles. So clay holds a lot more water than sand, 5 times as much water as sand does per foot. So that's how soil holds water. It's just all the surface area that the water clings to. Now, because of the airflow in soil, so if you have sandy soil holding 5 times less water than clay, the advantage of sand is that the roots can grow probably 5 times deeper. Because if you've got too much clay in your soil, you can see here the clay is filling the gaps up. And what we consider clay soil in Orange County is if the clay makes up 35% of the soil volume, you fill all the gaps, because there's the gaps between the sand and silt, 30%, around 33% of the volume. If clay gets up to 35%, your clay will fill all the gaps. No more airflow, no more easy airflow. And then we call it a clay soil. The hills in Orange County, all the hills seem to be sandy clay. Lots of sand in there, but too much clay, so it blocks some of the airflow. Now, as the rivers bring the soil from the mountains or the hills down toward the ocean, sand being the heavier particle settles out first. Heavier because it's a bigger particle, doesn't float as easily in water. So it comes out first. So all the communities between the foothills and the 5 have really good soil. So North Irvine, Tustin, Santa Ana, Anaheim, Buena Park, all these cities next to the hills but not in the hills, perfect soil. We got very sand. That's where this soil comes from. This is North Irvine, where the Great Park is. Very nice. And, I walked on the guy's farm after he plowed. It's like walking on a beach. Now, the way you analyze soil, get a mayonnaise jar, so you put soil in maybe half, 2/3 full. Add water to the neck, a few drops of dish soap, shake it up really good, get all the particles in suspension and broken up, and set it down on a counter. And what happens is the particles fall to the bottom according to size. So in this case, the sand, which is fairly easy to see in here, is about this much, maybe 75% sand. That's what this is. The clay, you cannot, you can't see the individual particles, and it looks like grease in the water all night, or gravy in the water, and then by morning it settles out. And if I swirl this a little bit, you can see it swirling up from the top. It looks like gravy. And in this jar, maybe 7 or 8% of the entire volume of the soil. So very little clay in that soil. And then in between the clay and the sand, hard to tell, it's silt. Because silt is just like sand, but a little smaller. So I would say 10, 20% silt's in here. But this is the best farm soil for a modern farm. It doesn't compact down when tractors roll over it. It breathes really well. The problem is it doesn't hold much water. But that's not our problem nowadays, is the water or fertilizer. It doesn't hold the fertilizer that well. Anytime you have real small particles, everything gets trapped in there. Water, nutrition, all that stuff. But this soil doesn't hold it. However, it provides a lot of oxygen, and we have irrigation now. So the farmer just goes out there and they water every day. Plenty of moisture, plenty of air, plants grow like weeds in that kind of soil. And sand is very stable. Whenever you want something not to move, you bury it in sand. It doesn't move. So this is sandy loam. And that designation, the amounts of sand, silt, and clay in it are roughly, say, 60, 30, 10. And the numbers can be up and down by 10 points, and you still have sandy loam. But that's basically what a good sandy loam soil is. If you have that in your garden, and you do if you're in Anaheim, it's very easy to grow plants. You got really good airflow. Now, the old definition of rich loam, you know, nowadays the journalists, they don't know what they're talking about. The horticultural journalists, they tell you, make your soil into a rich loam by adding all this compost to it till it's black. And that's not how you make rich loam. Rich loam meant that the clay in it was more or less around 30%. So it could be, say, 40, 30, 30, and that'd be a rich loam. You know, before the turn of the last century, not this century, but the last century, most of the farming was done Fountain Valley, Los Alamitos, where all the clay is, because that's what the farmers needed. They didn't have irrigation. After the rains were over, whatever the soil held is what they would have to farm with. They would call it dry farming. They didn't have any irrigation, so they wanted that clay soil. So clay was considered the rich soil before 1900, or before World War II, really. Then they invented sprinklers and irrigation pipes and all that. So rich loam was a higher clay content. Now they prefer sandy loam because if you can supply the water with irrigation and more air with the sandy soil, the plants grow faster. So anything with above, say, 35% clay is considered a clay soil because it no longer breathes. Up in these hills here, it's around 35, 40% clay. We've been told that there's no soil in Orange County that's above 60%. So there are some areas that are really bad in clay. But that being said, you know, sand, silt, and clay, you need it for your soil to be healthy. You need all three. If you've got about 60% clay and you added equal parts of sand to your soil, you'll knock the clay layer, the clay amount of clay down to 30%. And at 30%, your soil starts to breathe. So I've been told by the agricultural agents, if you have the worst clay in Orange County, you can still add equal parts of sand and it'll breathe. Of course, you'll raise the level of the soil quite a bit too. But adding sand to clay does not turn into concrete like some people might explain to you. That doesn't make any sense at all. You have to add cement to soil to make it turn to concrete, but and I doubt adding cement to clay soil will do anything like that. But sand and clay are part of a good soil, and you add more sand to it, you make good soil out of your clay soil. Okay, so the problem we're having in the industry is that about 40 years ago, our industry decided to start growing plants instead of in sandy loam, which they did, you know, in the 1950s. My dad grew I would say 90% of all his plants are growing in this material, in containers. The problem with loam is that it's heavy. Now, solid granite, 170 pounds per cubic foot. Sandy loam's about 120, 130 pounds per cubic foot. So that would be like a 7-gallon bucket would weigh 120 pounds. You couldn't lift it up. So they wanted to make the soil lighter. So they asked the universities, well, how do you make the soil lighter? And they said, well, take sand and mix it with equal parts of peat moss. And I would tell you that does work. Peat moss is a dead plant, but it's been dead, I don't know, 500,000 years. So it kind of doesn't decompose very fast at that point. And it's not related to anything we grow. It's not like you're trying to grow plants in dead bodies. So they said half sand, half peat. Cal State Fullerton still does that. Everything they do grows well. But peat moss has always been expensive. So they asked them again, how can we make this cheaper? And they backed down and said, oh, you can make it, your potting soil's 1/3 sand, 1/3 peat, and we'll add 1/3 fir bark. It's cheap. And so they did that for about 20 years until the 1980s, and that seemed to work. Even though bark's not great, at 1/3 the volume, it's not going to damage plants too much. But in the 1980s, they suddenly started doing tests and said, hey, if you just take out the other two materials and use straight bark, the plants grow really fast in that because it's so airy. Of course, you have to water it a lot because it doesn't hold that much moisture, but it's very airy. It's like hydroponic growing. So for the 3 months it takes most wholesale growers to grow a plant in a container, straight bark works really well. The problem with bark, it's not permanent material. And as it decomposes further, now what they do with bark is they decompose it because if you grind it up and put in a big pile, it's really hot, like 150, 160 degrees for about 3 months, and it cools off. They consider, oh, it's finished decomposing now, we'll put it in a pot and we can grow plants in it successfully. Well, the research still shows that once the bark cools off, you got about 5 months you can grow a plant in it. And beyond that, the bark continues to decompose. Well, it's always decomposing, but decomposes to a state that's now too non-permeable, becoming the porosity of it's increasing, so it holds more water, but it holds less air and less air and less air. And at that point, you start creating sewer gases and everything becomes toxic. It's like, okay, why are they doing this to us? I've written letters and they said, you know, this isn't sustainable plant material that you're growing us. What do you think bark turns into? And what they tell nurseries to do, well, see, the problem we have in the nursery industry is that the growers do not talk to the people who buy the plants anymore. It's a separate industry. Growers sell to nurseries or garden centers sell to customers. Customers kill the plants. Or the plants die, and we blame it on the customers for watering too much. When they're trying to grow plants that have been grown in a dead tree, and what grows in a dead tree is fungus and bacteria. So it's no fault of the customers when their roots start rotting away, because that's what they're growing. They're growing in stuff that's trying to rot their roots. You know, if you can't grow anything in a compost pile, what are they thinking? And we don't get it. We don't get why the industry won't fix the problem. The researchers who told them to do this pretty much know that it becomes a toxic medium, but they think that we've been told that they think that the bark turns into air, but if it's buried, it turns into sewer gases and it decomposes real slowly, creates toxic gases. It may not be a problem if you're growing your plants in a very sandy soil, because there's a lot of air in here and can prevent that sewer gas buildup. But if you've got heavy soil, if you've got clay soil, it's like putting your compost into a bucket and just watering it, and it becomes a pile of sewage. And it creates all these toxic gases, kills the plants. Plants are rotting and falling over. The nursery industry has been shrinking for the last 10, 12 years now. It's like, okay, come on, nursery industry, let's get on board and fix the problem, but they don't make it easy for the consumers. They're growing plants. You know, I was emailing a professor at UC Berkeley, finally someone who understands something, and he was studying why the reforestation projects in California are failing. They're buying plants from the native plant nurseries, they're putting them in the ground, they die of root rot. And they're finding that the plants already have rotten roots when they get them from the grower. And I said, and so I emailed him, I said, yeah, this is why, because they're growing dead trees. And he says, we concur. They're growing them in the wrong material, wrong growing medium. They should be growing them in pure sand. We don't know why the industry can't figure this out. It just blows us away that they're not doing it right. So a lot of our good customers know now that when they buy a plant of any size, and it's supposed to be a perm, like a permanent tree or something, or a permanent bush or a native plant, you got to strip that soil off of it somehow before you plant it to make sure that it doesn't die after it's planted. Or you surround it with something that breathes really well, something very airy material that'll help it breathe better so it stops that toxic gas buildup in the soil. So, but a lot of the plants you get, you know, especially if they're 1 gallon or larger, it's too much in there. We planted our yard, the last house I lived at, we planted it 25 years ago, and we noticed from one grower everything died, different types of plants, almost exactly 3 years after the day they were planted. It's like everything, Pittosporums, Escalonias, all these euonymus from this one grower all died. And we pulled them out of the ground. The roots in our soil were fine. But the roots were all totally rotten right below the stems of these plants. That little root ball of ground up wood product that they had put in there had just rotted them all out. And then from another grower it was 5 years. All their stuff died. From another grower it was 10 years, and all their stuff died. From 3 other growers, nothing ever died. Because one grower, it was Al Medino, and I'll mention their name because they were really good, never used wood. They knew that wood caused trouble, so they used this peat moss and perlite, which is a man-made volcanic rock, which is silicon dioxide, and we didn't lose a single one of their plants. We had another grower that used mostly dirt with a little bit of redwood shavings. Now, redwood's not the worst thing in the world, especially big shavings, because they take 7 years to decompose. Peat moss takes about 5 years to decompose, redwood 7, but all the stuff they use now, like fir bark, within a year or a year and a half, it's turning to black goo. So the plants really just can't take that. Okay, so if you buy a plant from me, they're growing in so we started making our own potting soils in the early 90s. It took us 10 years to figure out what was going wrong. I came into nursery, I was a medical researcher in college, and decided, my professor wasn't going the right direction, so I came back to the nursery industry. And at that point, they're telling my dad, well, you can't water your plants every day, even though since the 50s, he had watered every plant in the nursery every day and never had a problem. And suddenly in the 80s, it wasn't working. So he told me, you figure this out. So it took us 10 years, well, almost 10 years, from the late 80s to the early 90s to figure out, that's the soil the growers are growing this stuff in. So we had to make our own potting soil, because all the potting soils at that time were just ground up wood, ground up bark, ground up wood, little peat. And when we did our own, so wood shavings that are, well, anyway, it's a dead rotten tree, let's put it that way. That's what we're trying to grow plants. And so we did our first testing, sand versus this stuff. And pots this big, we put strawberry plants, and then at that time it was Brandon, Oregon, that was the big name at that time. The strawberry plants grew about this size, which we had been used to. That's typically what we've been used to. But in pure sand, the strawberry plant was like that. We're going, okay, this sand, this potting soil is poison. And we couldn't find any potting soils that did any better. I mean, we were told by a researcher that there are no potting soils out there that can grow a plant as good as just quartz, something made out of quartz, sand, perlite, pumice. This researcher was sending soil up into the space shuttles and said, nothing you guys make works at all. What's wrong with your industry? And at that point I saw the light. I go, okay, he's right. Nothing we sell works. We have to make our own. We knew that sand was the best potting soil. All the old books says it was. My dad's bonsai book says it was, but there's no way if you had a bag of sand this big that you can lift it, because sand is considered a very light soil, but sand's over 100 pounds per cubic foot. It wasn't going to fly, so we had to find something lighter than sand. Pumice is the lightest form of quartz in nature, so we tried pumice, but pumice dries out a little bit too fast. It's not bad. It's very got a lot of holes in it. It's porous, but it doesn't have quite enough water retention. So we asked the guys that you see in Riverside what holds water the best, and they told us peat moss does. So peat moss holds water actually, for as far as plants are concerned, peat moss is better than clay. Clay holds more water than peat, but clay won't give it up. It's stuck to the clay, whereas peat moss will let all the water go. So we decided, okay, let's try combining two opposites and see what we get. We got our acid mix potting soil, which has worked so well since the mid-90s. We still make the same thing. We said, okay, peat moss, pumice rock, two opposites. Very simple, and we still grow a lot of stuff that it works quite well. Problem with peat is not quite permanent, so it does shrink maybe 15% over its lifetime. So we decide, okay, for things like house plants or trees or shrubs, let's make something with less peat in it. And we made this other one we call our top pot, and it's only 1/3 peat. 2/3 of it is pumice, perlite, sand, and we put charcoal in there. And this one doesn't shrink. Now, the peat moss still is shrinking, but apparently if you've got all these big particles making up 2/3 of the volume, we think the peat moss strands, which are just like little strands of dead plants, are stuck between the bigger particles, so when they shrink, they don't change the volume. At least we don't see the volume changing. Water your soil for a few weeks to settle it, and it doesn't seem to shrink any more after that over time. So the volcanic rock, the sponge rock, the sand, and the charcoal are holding the volume for us. The peat moss is inconsequential that it's shrinking slowly. So we've gone with this for permanent applications now. And we made this one about 4 years ago, 5 years ago perhaps. Might be 6 years now. It's really hard to get, the EPA of California okays labels for bags. And it was really difficult to convince them that this was a potting soil, because in their minds, potting soil has to be some form of ground up tree. It's just weird. They said, you can't call this potting soil. It doesn't have any trees in it or a compost in it, anything ground up dead stuff. We're just amazed at, what the brains of our society are doing with their lives. But anyway, so we sell this. We actually sell it in other nurseries now. Other customers, because of our YouTube things, have picked up on it. So there's a hardware chain in San Diego called Dixieland that, at least one of their stores carries it now. A few stores up in the Bay Area carry it. This, we're having trouble because the sales reps don't know it for the distributor we go through. So we put this on YouTube, and hopefully they can get the order numbers from the supplier down. But okay, let's change to a different subject here. So we got the soil down. My last video, or last week, we talked about how to change the soil on a plant with the wrong dirt. So now let's talk about everything else. So once you have the soil right, too much water is no longer an issue. The only time too much water becomes an issue if the water sits there and doesn't move for a week or more. Because the water out of the tap and out of the sky has plenty of oxygen in it. So plants require, now different plants require different amounts of oxygen in the water. So our tap water as it is around 6 to 8 parts per million oxygen per million molecules of water. And most plants, that's fine. Goldfish, that's fine. That works quite well. There are some plants that need more than that. And it turns out that if you drop below 3 parts per million, that's when a lot of plants start having trouble. And certainly among plants there are different needs for oxygen. So the plants that the roots don't need as much oxygen in the water happen to be the things that you see growing in the neighborhoods. So grass, bird of paradise, which is interesting, palm trees, pines, junipers, conifers in general, like spruces, cypress trees, lily plants like daylilies, four-night lilies, roses are on that list. I would have to put impatiens on that list, which is why impatiens for generations were the #1 bedding plant because they didn't rot. Now, root rot, I should mention root rot, rotting of the roots is caused by a bacteria that's promoted by low oxygen levels. So when the oxygen level in your soil drops too low, the root rot organisms attack those roots and rot them. It's not a water issue. If you've got highly oxygenated water, you're not going to get root rot. So it's real odd that they still talk about watering too much when most plants can be grown hydroponically. It's just, it's like, why do they keep telling us that too much water hurts plants when you can grow just about anything hydroponically? It's not the water, it's the amount of oxygen in the water that causes the root rot. If the water oxygen level drops too low, you've got root rot problems. The plants that need a lot of oxygen are the ones that are hard to grow. Azaleas, gardenias, camellias, ferns, dracaena palms, a lot of indoor plants need a lot of oxygen. We think the flax plants, the kangaroo paws, which fall over and rot pretty easily, are part of that group. Avocado trees, citrus trees. Avocados and persimmons need the most oxygen, it seems, of the fruit trees. Citrus not too bad. There are fruit trees that need very little oxygen. Pears, #1, can get down to 2% oxygen in the water, 2 parts per million in the water, and they're still okay. But they have had trouble with water from recycled treatment plants. So when they recycle sewage water, sewage takes all the oxygen out of the water, so those reclamation plants are supposed to shoot that water in the air to get the air back in there. But in one case, they lost an orchard up in the Central Valley because the sewage treatment plant sent the water to the pear orchard. They flooded their field and all the roots suffocated and died. So the oxygen level in that water wasn't high enough. So anything dead in the water, sewage in the water, takes all the oxygen out of it. And if you're a pond person, you know that you can't have anything dead in that water. You put dead stuff in the water, your fish die. And water plants die. They can't breathe in water with dead stuff in it, especially things like compost. Just a stick of wood dropping in the water, nothing happens because the stick of wood doesn't have that much surface area that's decomposing. You take that stick and put it through a grinding machine, and now the surface area becomes 1,000,000 times greater. Suddenly that stuff decomposes really quickly, and it takes all the air out of the water, whereas the solid stick didn't. The little grindings do because they've got more surface area for the bacteria to work on, and the oxygen level in that water will drop very, very low very quickly. So even the plants that need a lot of oxygen, almost everyone in this room I would imagine has grown an avocado pit in a glass of water. No drainage, totally immersed in water, but if there's nothing dead in the water, that avocado can live in there for years. You've seen pictures of it, these avocado plants this big with all these roots in a glass of water. But in the farm, they need good drainage, so the water moves somewhere. You know, once there's soil in the water, it's harder for the water molecules to circulate and get up to the surface and grab their oxygen, go back down. In a glass of water, the water circulates very freely. The oxygen is easy to go through there, but once it's surrounded by clay, dirt especially, it's hard for the air to pass through that soil, and then your roots die of rot. So, but, you know, we really want the industry to fix themselves and stop telling people, oh, you're watering too much. Because in most agriculture, the more they water, the happier the plants. Now, 2 years ago when they had that first nice snowfall in the Sierras, they're trying to replenish the water tables in the Central Valley. They told all the farmers, we're not going to charge you, just keep watering. Water and make the water, you go down below the roots of your trees and into the water table. That's how they replenish, trying to replenish the water table. Just tell them, water, keep watering, keep watering. The trees love it. They like all that water. You know, they say, and people, the farmers in Oregon don't know how we grow apples in Southern California, because they said, yeah, after the rainfall, you know, the average rainfall in the United States is 30 inches a year. We get about half of that. Oregon, they get about 40 or 50 inches of water a year, which would make the soil wet. How deep? 40 inches of water. It's about, say, about 2 inches, max 2 inches per foot. So you get 40 inches of rain. That's a lot of, that's wet soil real deep. So they don't have, their soil is wet really deep here. You know, we might, our soil may be wet this deep right now. We haven't had that much rain yet here. What is it now? Maybe 18 inches of rain so far in Orange County. I remember the year we had 35 inches. This is how farmers measure water in the field. Before they had computers, and still some of them do this, walk around with a piece of rebar, you know, the thin rebar, 3/8 inch thick. This is just a hollow metal tube, but it'll work. If the soil is moist, you can push anything through it, just like a block of clay. If it's wet, you can push objects through it. If it's dry, you cannot push it through there. So, you know, they water from the surface. You just, wherever you water, you see how far you can push this rod in the ground. Now, the roots of most plants, I didn't say it on the drawing here, are about 1 foot deep. So in our, you know, our city soils, which we walk on, and unfortunately we pack them down so the air can't go through too deep, roots of most plants go down about 1 foot. So if you've got 1 foot of moisture, if you can push this stick in the ground about 1 foot deep, your plants are very happy. Their entire root system's wet. They're not shutting down. So farmers, now on farmland, it's usually better dirt. So usually they're about, you know, the roots go down up to 2 foot on farmland. So they want to be able to push this rod into their soil about 1.5 feet. If they can push, walk around their farm, so it'd be a 4 foot metal rod. Sometimes they have that L-shaped one you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's. And they'll push on it as hard as they can. If they can get it down 1.5 feet, their watering is about right. If they can't push it down that deep, they up the watering a little bit to make sure that the water, the soil is moisture deeper, because if the plant's roots start drying out at the very bottom, the plant starts shutting down. Now, if you're just growing a hedge or a ornamental leafy tree, yeah, that's fine. You don't have them, you don't have to have them growing with all their might. You just want them to sit there and be green, that's fine. You can probably let it dry down to about 4 to 6 inches before you water again. But for a production plant, if you're growing a rose or something you want, a fruit or a vegetable, if that plant thinks the soil's drying up on it, it just won't produce. So you got to make sure that you've got a good foot of moisture in the ground. And now the other problem is you can't get water in the ground very fast. So the average moisture absorption of the soil in Orange County is maybe at max 1/4 inch per hour. So So generally, if it rains a 1/4 inch of rain per hour, you're going to get puddles because it's not absorbing fast enough. You get runoff. If you get, occasionally we'll get an inch an hour and you just see this massive floods going on. But a 1/4 inch is about max. Well, the sprinklers put on about a 1/4 inch of water in about 4 or 5 minutes over your lawn. You can measure this. You put metal cans on the ground, straight sided cans, and you just turn on your sprinkler, see how long it takes for you to get a 1/4 inch of water in there. That's the maximum amount of length of time your sprinkler should be on at one time. So you put, the water restriction says 4 minutes. You only want to see sprinklers run for 4 minutes at a cycle. So turn them on for 4 minutes and then turn them off. Otherwise you can get runoff. Now if your land is perfectly flat, it won't run anywhere. But they don't make gardens perfectly flat or homes perfectly flat because then you'll flood. So there's always a slight slope going somewhere. Hopefully you've got a slope. So the water won't sit there long enough to soak in if you go more than a 1/4 inch of water at a time. Now this time of year, we're probably using about January, we know it's 4 minutes or one cycle per week is about on average. By March, it's probably about 6 minutes or 8 minutes a week. In July or June, when the sun's at its highest, it can be 44 minutes per week of watering out of a sprinkler for grass. This is grass, which is a heavy water user equivalent to your vegetable garden, your fruit trees and all that. They kind of, if all their pores are open and they're doing well, they're using a lot of water. So 44 minutes at 4 minutes per cycle, that means you're watering 11 times. That's essentially twice a day. You got to turn your sprinklers on to get the right amount of water for a lawn to survive and look really good, and for your fruit trees and all that. This time of year, 2 days a week if it's not raining. But again, you just measure with a stick. Poke that stick in there, see how far it can go, see if you're maintaining that depth. It was 1998, I think, I get in my backyard and I had clay soil. I can push the stick in over 3 foot deep. Wow, that's a lot of water in the ground that year. That was a wet year. I don't believe that was an El Nino year either. It was just having a real wet cycle that year. So now farmers over the years, in the old days, was just flood irrigation. That's all they knew how to do is open the floodgates, flood the field. They're watering maybe once a week. Well, Israel kind of did the forefront research because they have always had drought there or lack of lots of rain. So they figured out that the most efficient way to water is just to drip. Drip, drip. And even in California, the last 30, 40 years now, they found, that really works. You water a little bit all the time, the plants will need to apply less water to the plant than if you watered once a week. And we don't know why the water districts don't catch up on us. Like, come on, guys, use the latest research. Don't tell people that, if you water once a week deeply, you'll train the plant's roots to go deeper. Because they did that study too. University of California, Davis did an orchard. One side they watered once a week deeply. The other side they watered every day lightly. And then they dug the trees up to see what the roots did. Well, the side that was watered every day lightly had, they said, significantly deeper root system than the side that was watered once a week deeply. It's like, okay, they weren't expecting that, but that's the result. So now all the farms water every day. They also found, in the old days, they also would let the entire soil profile dry up before they start irrigating. So they put the trees under stress before they start the irrigation. Now they know it's better that once the rain stops, you turn your sprinklers on. You start watering your plants. They love to have that additional water below their root system. They said, boy, the trees look a lot better. They just don't wait for the soil to dry out now. They just start watering as soon as the rain has stopped. They said it was the equivalent of 1 extra water, and they had much better results on their crops. So don't wait for the soil to dry up. Just start watering as much as the plants need it.
So how do you deal with the city that says you should water only twice a week now and 3 times later?
Water at night so they can't tell. But yeah, there are farms in the Central Valley that water 18 times a day. They found, boy, that's the best way to water. Just they're watering with drip, and they had computers that just calculated how much water that plant used the last hour. So they said every hour it's above 80 degrees, which is 18 hours a day in the Central Valley, they would compensate for what that plant used the last hour. And they said they save 30% on their water bill just by doing it that way. So constant light irrigation is more efficient than deep soaking. As far as, again, production plants go. So vegetables, fruit trees, roses, anything you need to do something, that's the best way to water. Water a little bit, at least once a day. I mean, the farm we're next to watered every day, once a day. We knew because our water pressure would go up and down. Every time they turn on their valves, they use a lot of water in farms. I mean, that's where over 60% of all the water captured in Sierras goes to farmland. So don't feel bad growing edibles in your yard, because that's where all the water goes anyways. Now, it's really hard to tell. So the universities have been doing all these studies on how much water each type of plant uses. It's like, I don't know why they're wasting their time for that. Now, if you have monoculture, that is, all the plants are the same, all have the same conditions, full sun, yeah, it makes sense. But when you have a plant next to a wall or a plant next to a tree, none of that makes sense at all. Because the trees are the kingpins in your garden. And if you have one 80-foot eucalyptus within 200 feet of you, it's using all the water. And all the other plants are struggling to survive. You got to water that tree plus your plant to make your plant survive. So there's, once you have, when you first start a garden and there's nothing else planted at the same time, then it makes sense. You know that this plant uses this much water a day and this plant's going to use this much water a day. And they're trying to make that for all the parks and green belts going in. They're saying, okay, these plants use this much water, this is how much water you're allocated. Well, if they've got big trees in those parks already established, they're going to run into big problems. Those little plants are just going to suffer terribly because those big trees, the roots are the roots on a tree can grow 20 times wider than the tree is tall. And a big tree, like a big fruit tree, let's just say a regular sized fruit tree, 15 foot tall, 15 foot wide, on a 90-degree day in June, 50 gallons of water. That's how much that tree is using. So you can imagine a 100-foot eucalyptus on a 90-degree day, that's probably wanting about 400, 500 gallons of water or more. I mean, we were next, at our last house we lived at, the Greenbelt people planted these 80-foot pine trees that got 80 foot tall. We couldn't keep that side of the yard green at all after that. Once those trees broke 40 foot, it was just terrible. It's like, no matter, with the same regimen on the other side of the yard, this side was totally dry. Couldn't do anything about it. It was the pine trees that, with the drought going on, you cut your water back, that side of the yard just dried up. So it's the trees. Now, we've learned from the orchards what they do. So the orchards have these huge windbreak trees. They said every 5 years they take their trenching machine and cut off all the windbreak tree roots going to the orchard. They go back and they cut them, and they go back and they cut them because those big trees steal all the water. So they have to fight that. So, I mean, if you've got a little vegetable garden, you've got trees in your garden, you're always fighting that. Normally they say don't rototill the ground anymore, but now we tell people, every time you plant a new garden in your vegetable bed, rototill it, kill all the tree roots. You got to chop up those tree roots and get them out of there, because the trees really mess up the vegetables. They're just sucking all the water out of there. So that's one thing with watering, is you have to watch what's actually taking the water out of your garden. Again, maintain it down to a foot. That's the only thing you can check, is how deep the water is in your garden. Now on lawns, we've known this for quite a while, so we've seen what happens at about 1 foot to 18 inches of depth. Your lawn looks perfect. when you drop down to about 8 inches of moisture left in the dirt, you get those lawns that look a little like when you walk on them, the blades don't spring back up. And about 6 inches, you're getting the white tips on the grass. And at about 4 inches of moisture left, the grass just goes to sleep, it turns brown. It's not dead. Grass comes from areas of the world that go dry for up to half the year, so they can go to sleep for 6 months. And then you water and get the water moisture back down the foot, and they wake up and start growing again. So, you know, for fighting drought, everyone should have a lawn. And then all you do is, come summer, you just turn the water off. And then come late fall, you just turn the water back on, and your lawn's back. But here, you know, your homeowners don't want a brown lawn. But if they allow that, that's one of your best water saving techniques, is let the grass dry up and then revive it when you can. Anyway, let's see where we're going with it. The questions on watering. I'll mention that, on a side note, this is the best hose we've ever used. It refuses to kink. We've used these now for over a year. And, you know, regular hose, within the first week we get a kink in there. We're going, okay, this is messed up. This hose, called Flexilla, really refuses to kink on us. So we like it a lot. And plus, it's very light. So like, when we're dragging the other hoses around the nursery, you're knocking plants over. This thing is very light. It's like dragging a string around you. It's very nice that way. If you're watering by hand, most of these water wands don't put out much water. This is what we use in the nursery. It's got a lot of holes drilled in it, puts out more water. If you really want to do good, if you really want volume, you get the dram hose with the big old valve, so a lot of water, like this valve here, maybe 1/3 the water can go through that valve than this one here. This is a very large valve. And then if you want even more water to come through the nozzle, you get the dram redhead sprinkler nozzle, which has over 1,000 little holes drilled into it. Take that one off, put this one on, and then you get a lot of soft water coming out of there. That's quite nice. So that's what we use at the nursery for fast watering by hand. Any other questions on watering? So remember, if you're using our potting soil and plant your plants properly, very difficult to overwater a plant. Okay, fertilizer-wise.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
So if you have stuff in your acid mix that you're trying to root cuttings, should you then, after, if it's still wet, after a week, just take it out, put it on something so you can throw new water through it that can drain out the bottom holes while you're trying to root the plant?
Question was, if our potting soil stays too wet, should you let it dry out and re-water? Well, you can always put more water through the top, fresh water from the sink, and that'll flush through there. But our soil is half pumice rock. It's not going to ever be a lack of oxygen in there.
Okay.
So you can pretty much leave this sitting in water. In fact, one of the more rotting plants in the world, cyclamen. If you know what cyclamen is, they rot real badly in compost. We put cyclamen in our acid mix, set a pot about 8 inches across in a saucer of water, and we left it filled with water for like 3, 4, I think it was 5 years. It bloomed year round in that saucer of water in full sun in our pottery display for 5 years, and we couldn't believe it. It's underwater for 5 years, no problems, in our acid mix. And that thing rots real easily if it's in compost. Okay, fertilizer. So plants are made out of at least 17 minerals. We think it's more than that, but it's at least 17. This is on our website. You don't have to write it down. I think it's somewhere else too, but carbon, we'll use the symbols for them. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, iron, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, chlorine, nickel, and molybdenum. How many are there? 1, 2. Now that's the 17 that they consider to be essential. They just think there's another one, which makes all the world silicon, because that's what soil's made out of. It's really strange. Now that they don't grow plants in real dirt anymore, they found that they spray silicon on the plants, they look better. It's like, come on people, let's plant the plants in real dirt. You don't have to think about silicon. And you wouldn't have to think about nickel or molybdenum or a lot of minerals that are in natural dirt, but it's really funny. So we think silicon is actually essential to plants too. So most of these minerals are in every cell of the plant. You know, a lot of the nurseries will tell you, oh, phosphorus for roots. No, phosphorus is in every part of the plant. Nitrogen is for the leaves. No, nitrogen is in every part of the plant. They have a function in every cell of the plant. So, I mean, if you don't have enough nitrogen, your plant stops growing. But now what they do, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen is the bulk of the plant. So if you look at a plant or a tree, the wood is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's cellulose, which is, you know, sugar is C6, 6 molecules of carbon, 12 molecules of hydrogen, and 6 molecules of oxygen. C6H12O6 is sugar molecules. Cellulose is similar. Plant makes sugar out of carbon dioxide and water, which are in water near us, so you don't have to think about them. Change them to sugar. The plant changes sugar into cellulose to make the bulk of its body. So plants are mostly sugar. You can't eat it. There's only a few organisms that can break down sugar. That's certain bacteria. So all the animals that consume cellulose and actually use it, beavers, cattle, termites, they have to have this bacteria in the guts that can break down cellulose and turn it back into sugar. Just imagine if we get that bacteria operating, you can turn any piece of wood into food. So that's another one of those holy grail research projects they're doing, is trying to figure out how to turn cellulose back into sugar. Then no one will starve at all. Anyway, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, bulk of the plant. Nitrogen makes up the cell membranes. So our bodies are all cell membranes. Our skin is cell membranes, our hair is cell membranes. This plant is, what you see on the outside is a lot of cell membranes. So the cell membranes of the plant made out of nitrogen. Potassium is the salt of the sap of the plant. It is the salt of our blood and our bodily fluids. Potassium has to balance out the water so that everything happens. So it doesn't have any particular purpose, but it is, the more potassium you have, the more sap you can have, the more juice can be in your fruit. So if you want your fruits to be larger and juicier, make sure you have enough potassium. Phosphorus is the energy transfer molecule in all organisms. If you took biochemistry in college, I did, I took it twice. ATP, adenosine triphosphate molecules run around your body, energize things. The phosphorus molecule you need to transfer energy. Sulfur, I'm not sure what that, I think it's a balancing salt. I think it's involved in some enzymes. A lot of the metal minerals, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, nickel, are involved in the chlorophyll molecule. So if you don't have them, you don't have green leaves. So it's easy to see when those are missing because your leaves are not as green as they should be. So, in fact, nitrogen is part of the same thing. So, in fact, almost anything you have missing, the chlorophyll molecules aren't being made properly. You don't see that greenness in your leaves. But most of the metal minerals are involved in some enzyme reaction in the chlorophyll or some other enzymes that are making things in the plant. Now, the big three, the bulk of your plant, we don't think about those again because that's in the air and water. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the big three. They're usually written the other way around, but we know that. Well, let's do that for a second. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in that order because that's how it is on fertilizer bags. So if we consider, this is what the it's the USDA gives to the farmers. This is the guide they give to farmers telling them this is what they need to add to their fields if they're growing plants. So new plants want these nutrients in about this ratio. So nitrogen is 100%. So everything else versus nitrogen is this much. So 16 phosphorus, 62 potassium. So you can see potassium is real big. Sulfur is 9. Magnesium is 10. Calcium is 10. Those are your major and your minor nutrients. These are the micronutrients you don't need much of. You know, for generations they promoted iron. So your plants are lacking iron, that's why they're not green. Plants don't need much iron. 0.7, 0.4, 0.2, 0.06. You spit on a plant, you give it enough zinc. 0.05, 0.03, less than 0.01, and 0.003. Silicon they may need a lot, but because it is dirt, apparently you don't have to add it if you're using dirt. It's interesting, when orchards needed zinc to be added to them, they told the farmers, "Oh, just take a galvanized nail and pound it into the trunk of that tree. You got enough zinc." Because nails are zinc coated, the galvanized nails, so you don't need much of a lot of materials. Iron, all they said is you just have to make sure the soil's not too alkaline and you have enough iron. Yes?
It's interesting, no sodium on the list.
No, sodium's not. Plants don't really like sodium that much. So anyway, those are your minerals, the big three. Now the only mineral, one of the few minerals that Orange County has enough of the big three is phosphorus. We don't need that one in the ground. Now in a pot you would, but in the ground we've got, they said, about double the phosphorus that plants actually have to have. We're always low in nitrogen and we are low in potassium. The one mineral that moves the quickest when you apply it is nitrogen. That's why it's the main one, because it can change into ammonia, evaporate into the air. It can change to nitrates, and when it rains, the water washes it away. Everything else here sticks to the ground real good, so you shouldn't have to add it more than, say, once in every generation. If you apply potassium one time good, then you check it in 25 years. It just doesn't move. The plants really don't use it that fast.
So if your plants are missing any of those three, there is no, I've never seen a fertilizer or any product that contains that much. So do you buy them separately and mix them? Is that pretty much?
Oh yeah. Well, this is just the ratios. So if you have 1 part of nitrogen, then you want 2/3 as much potassium and maybe 1/5 as much or 1/6 as much phosphorus, and then it's more ideal that way. Now farmers usually apply this separately because that's how they buy in bulk. They can just use something cheap in nitrogen like sulfate ammonia, buy their phosphorus, everything separately. They have, they have the opportunity. They send their soil to a test lab, and the lab tells them this is what you have to do. I mean, farmers don't do this. The labs tell them what to do. And sometimes the labs, if they still have a problem, they'll send their leaf samples to the lab, and the lab will analyze and says, okay, even though your farm has enough of this, you still need to add more. Your leaves aren't picking it up. So they have that. You know, the lab guys have told me there's no way you can tell by looking at a plant what it needs. most people, you know, that you wouldn't have a clue. Because they said they're guessing all the time. They see this leaf sample and said, okay, it's got to be iron. And you test the lab and it's not. They said, you know, so they told me 20 years ago, just sell people something organic, because most organic products are dead plants. And this is what's in a plant. So if you apply dead plants to the ground, you pretty much have everything. Yes.
So if you have like potted plants or trees, like say in your mix, would you mix the fertilizer with your mix, or would you just put it on top of the plant?
We like to see everything on top of the ground. So in nature, what we have is the soil below the ground level is at least 99% mineral. But they said across the world, the average layer of dead materials is 5 inches. It can get pretty deep in other areas. So 5 inches of dead leaves on top of the ground, dead twigs, sticks, manure, stuff like that on top of the ground. A friend of mine went down to Guatemala about 20 years ago, and he wanted to see how deep the leaves were underneath the wild avocado trees. He said they dug through 5 foot of leaves on top of the ground. That's deep. So you can say in most forests it may be a foot deep or more. You know, of course, in the desert it's hardly anything. Deserts are really scant. But if the average is 5 inches, then it's got to be like 10, 12 inches in forest. They say if you go into the Sierras underneath the oak trees in the Sierra foothills, it's like that.
So my vegetable garden, I should have 5 inches.
Or deeper. Yeah, dead stuff on top of the ground. So if you have that much dead leaves on top, you shouldn't have to fertilize. When we end up throwing all our leaves in the trash, or the gardener blows them all away, and the plants are going, bring that back. That's our food. They're meant to recycle that. So in nature, the main recycler is called the fungus, called mycorrhizal fungus. Now you've heard of truffles. Truffles are the mycorrhizal fungus that is attached to the roots of oak trees in France, Spain, and they break down the old oak leaves and send them back up into the tree. Now they found that the recycling is a lot faster through this fungus than it is through compost piles. So in compost piles, bacteria eat up dead things, but the bacteria's got to die before that nourishment can get back to the tree. The mycorrhizal fungus just dissolve the leaf and send the stuff back into the tree. They said within 90 days sometimes. So you've got this tree. So mycorrhizal fungus was only discovered, I think, in the 1970s. Electron microscopes determined that most of the roots on our plants are not the roots of the plants. They're this fungus that's attached to the roots. It looks like the roots of the plant, but they're actually fungus strands that are attached to the roots of the plants. They said on some trees, 80% of what we think are the tree's roots are actually this fungus. So you got this pile of dead leaves on top of the ground. The fungus goes up in there and dissolves those dead leaves, sends all the nourishment back to the tree. This symbiotic relationship happened within a short while after plants got on land from the sea. So plants evolved in the ocean as green algae apparently, and they made it on land, but they couldn't eat the rocks. Turns out the mycorrhizal fungus can actually eat rocks, dissolve rocks, and get the nourishment to the plants. In return, the plant is giving the fungus sugar to make its body. So the fungus takes all this and gets all those minerals out of it, and the plant sends sugar to the fungus in return. And it's been a partnership that's been happening, what, 2 or 3 billion years? I don't know when plants come onto land. It's been a long time. So they say 95% of all the plant species use this system They can use the bacterial recycling system too, but it's not as efficient and not as quick. Some plants don't use this system at all. Some plants are really highly evolved and the roots almost act like mycorrhizal fungus themselves. Those are called the pioneer plants. So let's say you have a landslide or a flood and the river deposits new soil out there. Well, that new soil has some nutrients in it. There are some plants that are the pioneer plants that are highly specialized for that type of soil. They can gather all the nutrients they need and make a plant out of themselves. So those are the pioneer plants. So when you have an empty lot, some tractor bulldozes an area, first things that come in, they're usually grass weeds, mustard plants, something that has incredibly good roots that they can mine the soil, get all the nutrients into dead leaves. And then the trees and shrubs come in, their mycorrhizal fungus steals all the nutrients out of that dead leaves of the weeds that started that. And then from that point on, it's a closed system. The trees and the woody plants are taking the nutrients out of the dead leaves on top of the ground. The pioneer plants kind of disappear because they can't compete with that. So if you just have dead leaves on the ground, you shouldn't have so many weeds in your yard. Some of the weeds, I gotta admit, work with the mycorrhizal systems, but mainly the Brassicaceae family, the cabbage family, cabbage, broccoli, and all its relatives do not like mycorrhizal fungi in the garden. So if you're trying to grow cabbage, broccoli, or cauliflower, till that ground really good because you got to cut off all those mycorrhizal roots for temporarily anyway, and then grow that crop, and then the mycorrhizal will re-inhabit later on. So a lot of the fertilizers out here promote that they have mycorrhizal fungus spores added to them. So this doctor, they have a list of about 20 different mycorrhizal fungi spores that they add to this. Consumer Reports in the late 90s had an article saying this is all snake oil, but it actually might have some value. So in nature, mycorrhizals inhabit the ground, and it's very short times they can re-inhabit the soil. I actually talked to a professor at UC Riverside who was studying the area around Mount St. Helens after it blew. They said, I don't know how much it was, 200 square miles of land that was totally covered in ash and volcanic rock. So they wanted to see how fast the mycorrhizals repopulate. They said 5 years, the whole area is repopulated with mycorrhizal fungus spores. So it doesn't take long to repopulate the area. And one mycorrhizal fungus, so mycorrhizal fungi are now considered the largest organisms on Earth. They set up in Oregon, they found one genetically individual mycorrhizal fungi supporting about, what'd they say, 200 yards of the forest with just one big giant fungus supporting all those trees. So the one thing the mycorrhizal fungus does is that one fungus connects all the plants in your yard together, and they transfer water. And they found in near rivers that the river water can be transferred 70 yards from the river through the mycorrhizal fungus network system in the ground. So the first house I bought back in the 80s, I noticed that only half the sprinklers worked, yet the yard was still green. We're going, okay, this is interesting. Well, that's why it was 20-year-old yard, even though half the sprinklers are broken. Apparently the mycorrhizal fungus is supplying water to all the bushes and the long parts of the lawn that remain green. So you don't have to add it to the ground, but if you're growing things in pots, especially things that never have been in the ground, a cutting of something, seeds, and you're using our potting soils, which don't, now our top pot does have sand in there, so there's probably some mycorrhizal spores in there. Our acid mix is just peat moss and pumice rock dug out of the mined out of the dirt, so it may not have any mycorrhizal spores. So in that case, if you're starting something that's never been in the dirt, adding something with mycorrhizal spores can make sense. it helps break down all the organic stuff and put it back into the plants. Otherwise, it might take this stuff a month to get going, or fertilizers a long time to get going in a sterile condition like our potting soil. So mycorrhizal fungus may have some places where you might want to add it. But dead leaves are the best. Now, in nomenclature, there are things you'll hear like a simple fertilizer. Well, simples are the fertilizer, just one product in there. So like this is alfalfa meal, that's just alfalfa plants ground up. Cottonseed meal, just cottonseed ground up. Even among chemical fertilizers, ammonium sulfate is just one molecule, one type of fertilizer, so that's a simple fertilizer too. And then the blends are when they just take the stuff and put them all together. So this is a mixture of feather meal, fish bone, bone meal, probably cattle bone, alfalfa meal, potassium sulfate, cal meal, rock phosphate, and cal flour. So it's a blend of the simples. They're trying to make something better out of it. Then we have chemical fertilizers that are blends too. Now, here's one that always blows us up. You know, some marketing guy decided that if a fertilizer, all the numbers are the same, it must be a balanced fertilizer. So they promote that for years. So gardeners are demanding 20-20-20 or 15-15. They want to do a better job with their customers and get something that's balanced. Well, we know that on that chart, the plants don't need that. They don't want that much phosphorus or potassium. They just want that first number mostly. So here they sell on 20-20-20. Now I gotta admit, when you first put this on it, the plants look really good. Because phosphorus and potassium are a little bit harder for plants to get out of the ground. But if you do this consistently, you wipe out your mycorrhizal fungi. They can't handle that much soluble phosphorus. So this will eventually kill off the mycorrhizal fungi in your garden if you use it too much.
So if you don't, if you're planning to use that, then you use it
Sparingly.
every year? How often would you?
I wouldn't use this, but if you do use it once in a while, it's okay.
Once in a while, like every
Once a year.
It's once a year, okay.
Because plants really do look good when you do it. It's like you getting a birthday cake.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
it's just,
what I'm saying.
oh, that was good. But if that's all you get. Yes.
In the vegetable garden, if you mulch it with 7 inches of mulch, is that next year, you just dig that in or break it off?
Do not mix it in, right? That's the key, is do not mix it in. And generally, if you put a mulch, an organic mulch on top of the ground, it disappears really fast. It's amazing how fast the fungi and the bacteria work. It disappears, but yeah, don't mix it in. When you mix it in, that's when things start going downhill. Now, farms apply organic compost to the surface of the soil and till it in. And the reason they do that, but they don't put much on there. If you know what farms are doing, the max they do is 5 cubic yards per acre. Well, 5 cubic yards spread over an acre is about this thick. You can see it, but it's not much there. But they've been told that's the max, because if you get too much dead stuff in the ground, you compromise your oxygen, the roots start dying. But they said they have to turn in, because if they don't turn in, the wind blows it all down the street, and their neighbors complain. So they have to till it in to keep it on the farm. But that's the only reason. And in your own yards, yeah, don't till it in. It's better. Everything works better on the surface. There's more air there. They break down and don't create those sewer gases. And if you make it too thick and it's too finely ground up, the air is not getting in there. You're creating sewer toxic gases. So make sure it's not too deep. Like compost piles are too thick, and there's no air in the middle of that.
So mushrooms start growing in the compost on top, like a big layer.
Yeah, mushrooms, most mushrooms aren't bad. If the mushroom's not coming out of the bark of your tree, it's not a bad guy. Most mushrooms are good people, good guys.
So supporting the mycorrhizal.
Yeah, mycorrhizals do make mushroom type things because they are fungi. So, in fact, you know, I look up in the mushroom handbook, you look at most of them, they're mycorrhizals. They're there to support the plants. So. Okay, now do be aware too, the most important thing to say about fertilizer, they're not energy. So if you got a really weak plant and you throw fertilizer on, you're making your plant physically weaker because you're just giving it building material. You tell them, okay, now build a wall. Here's all this fertilizer, build a new wall. No matter how sick you are, build a wall. That's, plants get their energy from the sun. So the more sugar they have in them, the stronger they are. The more fertilizer they have, the weaker they are, but the faster that they'll grow. So growing is not equivalent to strength. It's just them growing. Now, so what we found out back in the 80s is you can spray sugar on plants. That was real interesting. The original formula was molasses, so we actually sell molasses now. But a university that was back on the eastern United States, I think it was Pennsylvania or Ohio, found they were trying to make cuttings of this hardwood tree, finding that the cuttings wouldn't finish because the carbohydrate content of the stems that they're using had dropped too low. They couldn't finish the rooting. So they developed a formula that they can spray on the cutting that would absorb sugar so they can finish the roots and go. So some people in Palos Verdes had noted that it's so cloudy there that their citrus never flowered or fruited. And they saw this formula for sugar that you can spray on the foliage of your cutting, said, let's try this. So they sprayed the leaves of their citrus trees with this sugar from, and lo and behold, they got them to flower and fruit. So we got a hold of this in the 1980s. We said, okay, let's see if this actually works. So I had a plum tree, 18 foot wide plum tree, averaging about 5 plums per branch over the whole tree. So that fall, when plants are storing energy for next year's crop, we sprayed one branch every 2 weeks with the sugar for solution. And the next year, that branch had 25 plums. We're going, that worked. The plant's actually absorbing sugar. So now if you apply sugar during the growing season, spring and summer, it just makes them grow faster. If you apply it during the fall when they seize their growth, it makes them store more energy for the next year. We've been spraying our plants every spring with sugar for the since the 1980s. This works. Now the formula that's out there, so if you want to try this, it is fun. I mean, we understand that the guys who grow the 1,000-pound pumpkins, they said that without doing this, without cheating, they can't break 500 pounds. So if you want to make that 800-pound pumpkin, you got to spray this stuff on the leaves of your plant. So in 1 gallon of water, original formula was 1 ounce of molasses. It's called molasses. I guess that's right. 1 ounce of seaweed extract. Seaweed doesn't have much nutritional value, but it is full of growth hormones, so it makes everything grow fast and big. And 1 ounce of fish emulsion. So that would be your nutrition. Ground-up animals pretty much has everything that plants have in them. So this fish emulsion is 511, but it's got pretty much all the minerals in it. They just grind up the parts of fish that we don't eat, put it in here, spray it on the plants, makes your yard smell like Dana Point. You put all this in 1 gallon of water. You can add a few drops of soap to make it stick better, although the sugar makes it stick pretty darn good. Apply this as often as you like. We do it often once a week on things you want to grow incredibly fast and large.
Is it okay to use some plants that are weak?
Yeah, well this is what makes them stronger. The sugar is what makes them stronger. It's like having more sun on them all day long.
Okay.
So they don't have to photosynthesize. They just have to use that.
What if the
sugar.
plant doesn't have any leaves because it's so weak and it lost all the leaves? Can you do that on the trunks and
Any
branches?
green part of the plant may be able to absorb it, but you may be out of luck if you drop all the leaves.
Yeah.
Now, the one interesting thing that's been studied is that if you spray any form of sugar on the ground, your plants turn greener too. It's because in the ground there are bacteria that turn nitrogen from the air into nitrogen they can use for fertilizer. Those are the nitrifying bacteria that are only found on roots of certain plants, the legumes. Beans, peas have root nodules that are friends to the nitrifying bacteria. I guess they give them sugar, and the nitrifying bacteria give them nitrogen. But if you just spray sugar on the ground, you get the nitrifying bacteria to do their thing without having the legumes around. So they found, yeah, you put this on the ground, your plant's green enough.
That's pretty good for avocado citrus trees.
So we do it all the time.
And when do you spray them?
All the time. Anytime.
Anytime.
If you do it when they're not growing, they're storing up energy for the next growth cycle or bloom cycle. If you spray them while they're growing, they just grow faster. So you get pretty amazing results when you do that. So
But if you're trying to keep the trees like at 7 or 8 feet, you want to give them energy to.
yeah, spray the sugar. Don't spray the seaweed or the other thing.
Just
This is sugar. That makes them produce more fruit. If you want just fruit production only, then this is sugar. Now, the longer it stays liquid, the more it gets absorbed. So early in the day, late in the evenings is the best time to apply.
Can you spray that while they're blossoming, or should you wait?
Doesn't
till-
matter. Anytime you want to do it.
it wouldn't, would the sugar call for bees or any other animals or no?
Ants.
Ants, okay.
I mean, ants are lazy. Instead of farming sucking bugs, they just eat the sugar right off the plant.
But then you will have a problem with the ants, right?
You might. So use good ant control. We do have really good ant controls that work. But that's ants in nature. The main problem with them is that they farm sucking bugs because the sucking bugs suck on the plant and excrete the extra sugar. So the ants know that if they bring aphids and mealybugs and whitefly and put them on your plant, they get sugar from those things.
It's a problem though, right?
Yeah,
'Cause you don't want
yeah,
afterwards.
control your ants. Okay, any questions on fertilizer? So calcium is quite important. It was number 5 or 6 on the list. So that's why we apply gypsum. It's not to make your clay, it doesn't change clay, but it applies more calcium to the soil. We need more calcium, especially for fruit trees. And apples and pears, if you don't have enough calcium, you get those hard knots in the flesh. On tomatoes and peppers, you get the hard areas on the bottom of the fruit. You get hard parts of the flesh in cucumbers and squash too, if you don't have enough calcium. So it's pretty important for getting your fruit developed properly. I'll mention there are some interesting products out there. So Magnum Grow, this was named by a guy, but Dr. Tommy Kearns volunteered. He's a chemist who volunteered at Rose Hills and Whittier. He said, okay, I can figure out what the roses need. In this soil in Whittier, with this water we're using, this is what you need to add to it to make the plants grow. So this is really active for roses in California. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 minerals in it. So if you use this with our soil here and our water here, it should be everything. The most common fertilizer used by all most popular single fertilizer used by nurseries in the United States, Osmocote. We use that here too. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 minerals. If you don't count carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, there's 14 minerals that you have to add. This has 11 of the 14. So it's quite impressive for a chemical fertilizer. I've only seen one chemical fertilizer that had more than 11 in it. Now the organic fertilizers, again, in the long haul, not only are they, they're not missing anything. They've got all 17 minerals in there. Again, 14 of which you have to apply, but they also feed the organisms that keep the soil alive, keep the soil soft. Like worms and amoeba and protozoas that live in the ground. So organics in the long haul are still better than the chemicals. Chemicals are fine in the short haul, but know what you're getting into. Your soil is not alive. If you add dead leaves to the ground, which are, you know, essentially the same as this, you'll keep your soil fluffier and the plants happier in the long run. So organics, better in the long haul. Short haul, when we're growing plants here at the nursery, this takes too long to kick in. So you get a sterile soil like our acid mix or a top pot, put the plant in there, this might take a month to get started. Now, the organic people know that, so they have developed newer products. So doctor said, oh, we're falling behind time, let's do what the farms are doing. So we're next to this organic farm. They didn't use anything like this, except at the start of the crop. Well, the crop's growing, they use something like this. This has been fermented. So that doesn't have much smell. It smells like, you know, organic materials. This smells like a sewer, a dead rat. That's because the bacteria have already worked on it and broken it down. So this product will work faster than that product. So on the farms, whenever they're fertilizing, boy, it stinks because they're using stuff that's been fermenting so that their plants react faster to it. Plus they usually fertilize with irrigation water, so it's got to be liquid on top of that. But it smells on farms, organic farms, because they know this stuff works faster than the stuff that hasn't broken down yet. So that's some of the new stuff out there. Stuff we call this Doctor Life. Still slower than this. You use the chemical fertilizer, you can see results the next day. You spray on the liquid stuff, you swear right after you get finished with that, you go, that plant's greener now. It goes right through the leaves. It's just amazing how fast that stuff works. And I will mention, we have a line of Fox Farm products. This company, Fox Farm, became big along with the marijuana growers up north. So they're in Humboldt County. They try to cater to people growing marijuana, so they, you know, beastie blooms. You put this stuff on, you get incredible blooming. Grow big. If you want to grow as big as you can, you put this one on there. I'm not sure if these actually work, but they sell well. To people who are really trying to grow stuff. Now, if you're growing marijuana, you're really into it.
What about the Happy Frog soil conditioner?
So Happy Frog is basically compost, wood compost with earthworm castings and the mycorrhizal fungi. So it's a really good surface mulch. Now they promote it as a soil amendment. I would never use it as that unless you have really sandy soil. But as a surface mulch, that'll be hard to beat. Although a cheaper product like garden compost actually might be a little better. So that has mostly wood products in it plus earthworm castings. This one is wood products, rice hulls, green waste, that's leaves, and chicken manure. So this product, even though that one costs 3 times as much, that's like $27, and this is $6. This may actually be the better product because it's got dead leaves in here too. Plus chicken's incredibly good. Chickens poop out almost pure chemical. So the stuff works pretty good. Any question on the fertilizers? We have to like seed mills a lot. So, of course, in nature, what's in a seed is supposed to nurture the new plant. So, you saw, remember, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratios, roughly 6:2, I think it's 6:1:4, roughly the ratio. This is 6:1:2. This is really, you know, it's a seed mill, so it's got to be close to those numbers that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is recommending for farmers. So the seed mill, here's cotton 6:2:1. Now I have a product called corn I have I don't have the big bag. This one they just put pure corn in here, which is 901 or 900. But the other product where we sold out of this week, they mix corn and wheat together with potassium sulfate, and it's 8:2:4. We like that ratio a lot too. 8:2:4 on the larger size concern with Roundup today.
Do those work in the soil or on top of the soil?
I'd rather just leave it on top. I mean,
Is
cover
it
with
working?
mulch. Cover with mulch so it stays moist, but leave it on top. I just don't like anything put into the dirt anymore. I mean, University of New Hampshire claims that there is no organic matter in the ground. It's 100% mineral. Most other sources will tell you, they say it's 0.09% organic, a little less than 1% organic. And most of that's going to be dead roots of the plants.
So you don't need that in your acid mix?
Pardon?
Would you use any of those in your acid mix
Well, yeah, all these are fine.
on top?
Yeah, we just throw fertilizer. You know, the ag guys tell me whenever they tell farmers to throw stuff, they tell them, throw it at the trunk. Because, you know, they said, we have no idea where the roots are, but if you throw it on the trunk, it'll be close. If you throw it anywhere else, they said, we don't know if the plant will ever get it. So they just tell the farmers, throw everything at the trunk of your tree. Now, when I was a kid, my dad had 3 fertilizers in his nursery. And those things were in 100-pound bags. I mean, we don't do that anymore, 100-pound bags of things. But he had a 100-pound bag of blood meal, dried cloud's blood, which is just close to pure nitrogen. It's got everything else in it too, but in small quantities. 100-pound bag of bone meal, which doesn't really work as well as they said it did. It's just pure phosphorus, but it takes a long time to break down. And he had cottonseed meal. That's all he ever used at his old store, were those 3 things. Now, way long time ago, you know, if you go back to the beginnings of farming, they would take the black dirt out of the riverbeds, which would be the human waste collected at the bottom of the riverbed. And that's what they used to fertilize their farms with, the black soil. Human waste.
But that killed a lot of people too because of the,
Oh yeah,
yes, that was
it's not
bad.
clean.
There was a lot of diseases.
They didn't know about microbes back then. Okay, let's get to mulching. So mulching can fertilize your ground well too. There are farms up north, not the farms that use tractors, but just the smaller farms that now cover their ground really deep with a mulch. So this one farm up north back in the 80s said, now we were puzzled, they're in Seattle, or near, in Washington, and their apple orchard need watered all summer. But they said the forests nearby were lush and green. They said, well, what's going on here? Our apple trees are smaller than those big fir trees over there. Why do we have to water ours and they don't water theirs? So they said they walked in the forest in the morning, and all that pile of dead leaves on the ground this deep was just soggy. And apparently, if you have anything on the ground this deep and the air's humid at night, it just condenses out as water. So they just piled the orchard. They just called up all the tree trimmers in the area and brought them over the tree trimmings from the chopped up trees, and they piled 18 inches on top of the ground underneath their trees. They said they have never watered since. Now, you know, our area here is probably not humid enough. Maybe if you're Newport Beach, right along the coastline, but anytime you have that much mulch on the ground at night, it does condense water out of it. One of the interesting seminars I heard back in the 1980s was this one from Texas. They couldn't figure it out. They said in the middle of a drought in Texas, the highway department is just going, you know, there are all these dead plants alongside the road, so they were just chopping them up and then piling them on one side of the road. They said that side of the road turned green. Just with that pile of dead stuff there, they couldn't figure it out. Well, that, you know, if you've been to Texas, it's like 80-90% humidity all the time. So at night, it was just condensing water in there. And that side of the road greened up. Wherever you pile that stuff on like that. I mean, they use the same technology now in a lot of hot, humid countries near the equator. They just create these structures that have a lot of airflow through them that are made out of metal or concrete. And it's cooler than and they shade it, so it's cooler than the air. And the water just condenses. That's how they get drinking water along the coast nowadays. Water just condenses out of those things that the humid air goes through them. It's cooler. This water just condenses right out. You have to have a humid climate for that to happen. So, but so the deep mulch around the plants, they said in the row crops where they're growing vegetables, it was 12 inches deep. Of course, they would have to thin it out whenever they plant a new crop. They had used transplants that already had some size, and they just couldn't put seeds in that. So seeds need sunlight to sprout. If it's underneath 12 inches of mulches, never would sprout. So they would start their seedlings in little pots or trays, and then when they're tall enough, they would put them in that and then put the mulch against them and grow them that way. So they haven't watered ever since the 80s. They haven't fertilized either. However, they said they do have chickens. The chickens do the fertilizing with all that compost or mulch on top, organic stuff on top of the ground.
So the mulching, even for plants that are not deep, the roots are not supposed to be deep, that much mulch will work? Wouldn't rot the
Well, you got to make sure it's not too fine. So, like grass clippings are so fine, the air can't get through them. So then that can cause trouble. But as long as you're, if you chop up a tree and throw it on the ground, it's pretty coarse. The air gets through there very nicely. So, yeah, this stuff like that, this coarse material on top of the ground. I mean, my last house, I got I couldn't stand throwing anything away. So whenever I was trim my hedges, take all those dead leaves and throw them underneath my avocado tray. You couldn't stand throwing stuff away anymore. So this is valuable stuff. You can't throw it away. So every time I trim things, I would just cut them into smaller pieces and throw them underneath my fruit trees. My front garden, what I would do is, like I have rose garden in the front yard, I wanted that to look prettier. So once a year when I cut my roses back, and I do it right about now, strip all the stuff on the ground, dead petals, leaves, the bark from the last year, and throw underneath my fruit trees in the backyard, and then put down a layer of compost and then bark on top of that, and that compost would feed the roses for the next entire year, plus the bark. The bark breaks down too, and then that would be it for that year. Just a new layer every spring, and that would pretty much get the plants going through the whole year. Instead of using any of the fertilizers, I would just use the compost or this happy frog. Or chicken manure. Chicken manure works as well too. I remember one year I had a broken bag of chicken manure. Just put the whole thing underneath my orange tree. Didn't have to fertilize it for 3 years. That bag lasted that long.
So if you have some mulch, not that thick, and you were gonna put garden compost on it, just ½ inch? Or?
Yeah, about a ½ inch to an inch.
Okay.
Quite a bit of nutrition in there. Our garden compost is maybe 15% chicken, and the chicken manure is about 85% chicken.
even for potting plants, would that be the same? You have to put this much of that for
Yep.
potting.
Yeah, and if you plant things in our acid mix or top pot, you either have to have something fertilizing constantly like the time release fertilizer, or you make sure you have a good mulch on the top. Once you put a mulch on top of our potting soil, then it acts just like the garden.
So I have some raised planters built and I need to fill them. What would you recommend? What can I
This
do?
is the cheapest. But, you know, if you have a pickup truck, you can go down to a building supply yard. What city are you in?
Torrance.
I don't know them down there. There might be a Sepulveda, I don't know. But this is
There's Sepulveda.
sandy loam is often called fill dirt because they would fill a hole in a construction site with it. They don't use anything with clay because clay shrinks when it's dry and expands when it's wet. They've got to use something that's almost pure sand, but pure sand is more expensive. You can use pure sand. Pure sand grows wonderful plants, costs a little more. Sandy loam is what a farmer dreams to have on their property, and it's dirt cheap. Don't ever buy anything called topsoil. That's the main thing. Topsoil, the guys with the tractors and the dump trucks think that they can improve their sandy loam by adding manure and compost to it. So it's like, and they make it usually 40 to 50% organic, which would wipe out any farm. Wiped out my, that's how I know about dirt now, because back in the early 90s I bought my last house. Trusted the fill companies that they would tell me what to put in my raised planters. Brought in 170 yards of topsoil. Fill my planters with it. Some things survived. Roses made it. My lawn survived that. But I wiped out all my gardenias, azaleas, hibiscus, gardenias, citrus, avocados. Okay, what did I just do? Why can't I grow these plants in this good soil? And it took us a few years to figure it out that it was the compost that was the problem. That soil was 40% compost, way over what it should be. Now, University of California does say that there are some farms in the Delta regions near Sacramento that are 40% organic from the dead reeds that grow out there. They said those farms can only grow seasonal crops, the things that take a few months to grow, and they have to manage their watering very carefully because things rot in that stuff very easily. So if you have an organic soil, you always have to be on top. You can't water too often, and you can't grow anything permanent in it because the roots won't survive there very long. Good. So like this, some people have bought decomposed granite, which is usually the same price, and it works quite well. A little cleaner. And some people just like to work with sand. And that's fine too. Usually the sand loam is cheaper.
So then I don't have to add anything to that, just on top.
This is your perfect growing conditions. Okay, so we want this mulch layer on top too, for several reasons. Probably the best one is it stops weeds seeds from germinating. So the problem we have this year, of course, weeds are growing all over the place. The only way you can prevent weeds from starting is to have something at least a couple inches deep on top of the ground, because most seeds will not start in mulch. And most seeds can't start underneath because it's too dark. The seeds have to be real close to the surface. The seeds, that is, within a ½ inch or so, or quarter inch, to get enough light to sprout. And when they're buried that deep underneath the mulch, they can't do it. Now, if you have a few small seedlings coming up, you cover them with mulch, you kill them. If they're already established, you got to pull them out. So, if you're weeding an area, you kind of pull and cover as you go, and then you won't get the weeds growing back until your mulch gets too thin again. But, so that's number one reason to put mulch in gardens, to stop those. That's the only way really to stop weeds for any length of time without using chemicals. The other thing is insulation. So bare dirt in the middle of summer, 1 foot deep. They did the study in Texas, so they had an orchard. The bare soil, 1 foot deep, 90-degree air temperature was 120 degrees, 1 foot deep. That wipes out the roots. Those plants always look sick when the roots are underneath that much. Now, with the tree that, a full-size orchard tree, the tree is shading the soil underneath it. So that part is pretty safe, but out here the roots can't grow. It's just too hot. They found out with 3 inches of mulch, the soil temperature did not exceed 86. Right where the roots want it. So if you have mulch covering the ground, now if the no mulch on the ground, the roots have to be deeper where they can't breathe to survive the heat. But if you have mulch in the ground, they can come right up to the surface. So they have a lot more soil to work with if you have mulch in the ground. So without mulch, the plants just look constricted. They just don't have a good root system at all. Put mulch in the ground, sun, and the root system is huge and healthy and getting plenty of nutrition on top of that. And the mulch also stops evaporation of the water off the ground. So the mulch itself does not absorb water from the dirt below it. It's too porous to. So the water doesn't evaporate off the surface of the soil. So it conserves water. It also has like a sponge. So when you're irrigating, this will hold the water and won't let it run off so much. So you'll want to have a good deep mulch layer on top of the ground, trying to maintain it. Different things last different lengths of time. So leaves, in a matter of months, they disappear. We sell different kinds of bark, and the prettiest one happens to be the ones ground up the finest. So this one called bark mulch lasts about a year if you put it 2 inches deep. It disappears in about a year. The bigger chunks of bark we have, small bark, medium bark, the bigger nuggets will last 3 years, 4 years. We have redwood, we have cedar, which looks like red gorilla hair. That lasts a couple years. The redwood strips, redwood mulch, which they also call gorilla hair, redwood lasts the longest, so that probably lasts 5, 6 years or more. They say redwood lasts 7 years. But the longer it lasts, the less nutrition it provides, but it does the other things, the weed prevention and the insulation. Squirrels are tough.
So do you recommend to use the smaller ones so you can be replacing every so often, rather than have one that lasts for a long time?
Well, you can throw fertilizer on top, and most of the fertilizers will wash into it through it, but
Would it be easier to just kind of have to redo it every so often so you renew?
well, yeah, if you want to look prettiest, yeah, my front yard, that's what I use, and I just replace it every year.
The little ones, right? And then
Right.
replace it every so often.
It's prettier. The shopping malls around here, I bought the coarser ones from us because the small ones blow away.
I know, I noticed that they're always beautiful. I'm like, why? What do they do?
Okay, the last topic, I think we covered the mulches pretty well. I mean, some people use gravel as a mulch and rock as a mulch, and that still works for the insulation, the weed control. Not as well as nutrition. And we don't like to put the weed block down underneath it, that woven plastic stuff like this material, kind of like weed block. Weed block won't let things to it very well, plus it really doesn't stop the weeds if you don't cover with anything, no weeds grow on the weed block. If you cover with anything, the weeds grow on top of the weed block, so it doesn't really work. Well, the one instance to put weed block down, if you've got nasty nut grass or Bermuda grass in the ground coming up, it would stop it. It would stop it. So if you've got a weed established in the ground that keeps coming through the dirt, then the weed block would stop it from getting light, and then it would slowly die off. But that's the only reason.
If you wanted to put something on the paths in your garden area, so you would be walking outside when it's wet, would you recommend decomposed granite or stuffing stones?
DG works quite well. Gravel works really well too. I do like gravel. It's clean. DG is pretty clean too, though. So DG is decomposed granite. Is just the soil off the mountains that hasn't been through the river yet. So the pieces aren't rounded; they're square, kind of blocky, so they don't move like when you walk on, they don't move like sand. Easier to walk on DG than on sand but it's the same material. Still mostly quartz. Okay, so for some reason, horticultural journalists tell you have to rotate crops because the last crop took all the nourishment out of the soil. It's like, okay, why do they stop saying that? Because we know all the materials, you can put all the nutrition back in. There's something you can't do is get rid of what just died. So each crop, you can pull the plant, like if you have a tomato plant in the ground, and the crop's done. So on most crops, about almost 2/3 of it is stems and leaves, and about 1/3 is going to be roots. On most plants, that's the case. 2/3 above the ground, 1/3 below the ground. When you pull this plant out, you can get a lot of the big roots out, but a lot of those small ones, they're just like hair. You can't get them out of the ground. So usually the first year you grow a tomato plant in a new plot of soil, it does great. You're going, oh boy, this is really easy to grow. Next year you put it in the same spot. Not bad. It does about 80% as well as the first year. You're going, okay, we'll plant tomatoes. That's a good spot for tomatoes. Let's plant them again the third year. Third year they turn yellow and die before the crop is done. You go, well, that didn't work. And the next year after that you try again, dies even sooner. Too many dead relatives in that house now. So just think if someone got slaughtered in your house, you leave little bits and pieces of their bodies in the rooms, it doesn't take much to make you sick. And neither does on plants. Just little pieces of this plant's relatives in the ground here are going to cause major disease issues with this plant. If it's unrelated, if you kill a frog in your house, it probably won't affect you. If you kill a fly in your house, it doesn't affect you. Kill a monk in your house, yeah, it affects you. You got to get rid of all the bits and pieces of that body. So whatever's closest related, dead things cause trouble. The closer, more related closely to you is, the worse it gets. I have on this sheet what vegetables are related to each other, so you can have that, so you know which vegetables that you need to rotate. Anything in the same family is going to be too closely related to put back in the soil. So back in Europe in the 1500s or so, they noticed that if they didn't plant the same thing, the same plot every year, it did better. So they thought they're renewing the soil when they did that. They didn't know what was going on, but they thought something was going on. So they, every other year, now they know if you want to avoid any problems with the last crop, like the organic farm we're next to would only plant the same crop in the same soil once every 10 crops, 10 crop cycles, which they're doing 2 or 3, sometimes 4 crop cycles per year. So it'd take them 3 or 4 years to get back to growing the same plant again in the same plot. So we were there for 4 years. We never saw them ever plant the same crop in the same plot of dirt twice. Now there are farmers who you see just plant strawberries every year, but they're the crop farmers use that clear plastic. So what they do is they sterilize the soil before they plant the strawberries every year by injecting with a soil sterilant, fumigates the ground. They're getting rid of all the fumigants because they apparently affect the what's the layer called? Ozone layer. Although they said the ozone hole closed now, so I don't know what they'll still do with all that material, but they've been on the strawberry farms. They lay the plastic over the fields. They have the fields shaped like this, and then they lay the plastic over them, put the fumigants in there for 2 days, and then they cut the plastic, lay the plastic down the sides of the berms, and let it air out for a week, and then they plant the strawberries. And what that does, it kills all the disease organisms that are there feeding on last year's strawberry root still. So they can grow the strawberries in the same spot over and over. Now strawberries, next to marijuana, strawberries is the big money maker in Orange County. I have relatives who bought every member of their family a house back in the 60s. They said they're clearing back in the 60s about 40 grand on 5 acres of strawberries. If they have a good year, they bought a house for one of the kids. If they had a bad year, they didn't buy any house. But all their kids had houses by the time they were 20 years old. So growing strawberries is quite profitable.
So would that be an advantage of using the grow bag for the tomatoes? You could just dump the soil each
Sure.
year?
Gets expensive. But yeah, so farms rotate their crops because they can't replace their soil. So you know, one thing about your soil, don't mess it up. Don't add too much organic matter inside of it because you know, when I did my yard, I had 170 cubic yards of the wrong soil. It took me 10 years to get rid of that. Every week, I load my pickup truck with half a cubic yard, which is all our 4 cubic bin can hold, that, you know, they wouldn't complain, the waste management would complain if I did that. So half a yard a week for 5 years, or was it 10 years, I think I spent digging out the beds slowly by slowly and refilling. Now, interesting to note, when we had that 40% organic soil in there, when I was digging up, I noticed one root going through it about every 6 inches. When I replaced it with the sandy loam, and rechecked it 3 months later, one root every 1/4 inch. So 6 times more roots per volume in this than in that mended soil. So this, you know, when you mend the soil, you can't grow roots in it. There's not enough air to support that much roots. One root every 6 inches versus one root every 1/4 inch. So people who have bought that same amended topsoil said, yeah, their vegetables grow this big and they pull them out, the roots are that long. The roots are just can't develop when you have that much organic matter in the ground. Yes.
Would you add worm castings into that or on top of it?
On top. And don't put worms in your ground. If there's no worms in your yard, don't add them. They're not native here. Even the Organic Gardening Society is telling people don't add worms. They're not native to the United States. It's like bringing in a foreign creature. And they said in the Midwest they're losing forests around the cities because the worms are messing up the ecosystem. They're not part of the ecosystem and they're messing it up. So we don't need the earth. So anyway, so it's nice to have at least 3 different beds. More is better, but at least 3 different beds in your vegetable garden so you can rotate your crops between the 3 beds. 1 year, tomatoes, peppers, all the related plants, eggplant in one bed, and the next year you put them in the next bed, and then the next bed. You just keep on rotating that way. I mean, the farmer next to is growing cabbage, and that's such a, you know, I think you lose money when you grow cabbage. They said, yeah, we have to use it as part of the rotation site. So a lot of those crops, you know, that may pay the labor, but that's about it. But they do it because they have to rotate their crops. Squash, cabbage, they don't make much money on farms. Strawberries. Strawberries are the big money maker. Or this year it's going to be avocados. Making money this year, yes.
So if you're doing that, how far apart do those beds need to be?
They can be pretty close, as long as they're not, you know, the roots
So
can't
like
make it over.
2 feet apart is good enough?
Yeah. Try to keep the tree roots out of those beds. The tree roots really mess them up. Or any big plants nearby can mess up the beds because most vegetables do not like competition. The more beds you make, the better. So the more rotation. We know up in Napa Valley, they're not allowed to grow anything but grapes up there. So any plant, doesn't matter what it is. So one thing to note. So what they know about trees, Forest Department found this out a long time ago. So the way a tree lives and dies is every year it grows new roots. So it's got all these root hairs close to the tree. They die. The next year it grows a new set. So every year the tree's got to grow roots further away to stay completely healthy. And they said as long as the tree can afford to support a bigger root system, the tree thrives. Gets bigger, bigger, bigger. Roots go further and further out there. But essentially they said once the tree reaches its limit to how big its roots it can grow, dies really fast. Now, in human terms, that's still a long time. So like a redwood tree may grow a root system 1,000 foot long. It may look good for 4,000 years, but it dies in 50 because then the roots cannot support the bigger root system. It's got to live within the dead roots of itself. It goes sickly and gets ugly and dies relatively fast. So all trees, all plants work with the same system. Now, it's interesting, they said in North America you will have mono, you call it, I can't remember what they call it now. Just one tree makes the forest. Like you go to Colorado, you see all these aspen trees here, all these pine trees here. They said because in the temperate climates we have really bad wildfires, and a really bad wildfire will sterilize the ground a foot deep. It's not that deep, but it's deep enough to clean the roots up. So you clean up all the diseases that are on these dead roots of these trees. So the same trees can grow back again. They said if there's no fire, something else has to grow. So they said in the southeast United States they're losing all the red maples because there hasn't been any major fires down there. So the maples were replaced by pine trees because it's all, the ground's full of dead maple roots. So it's all sad, but they have to burn it to get the maples back. Now they said in the Amazon rainforest, all the trees look alike, but they're not related, they said. They said there's the average distance between two trees that are the same species is, I think they said 170 yards. So there's just hundreds of different species of trees in rainforests that never burns, so they can't grow that close to each other. So it's interesting how nature works. So they can't grow in the same, trees can't grow in the same soil twice unless it's cleaned up. So I actually met a guy, one of our customers said, oh, when he was in college, he didn't know why he was doing this, but he worked in an apple orchard. And whenever they ran over a tree with one of their tractors, he would have to go in there, dig out the tree, dig out an area of soil 18 inches deep and 3 foot across, and dig another hole in another part of the orchard with no apple trees and switch that dirt. So this dirt here now doesn't have dying roots of the apple tree, it's got clean dirt in it. Well, it could be weed roots, but not the apple trees. Then he'd plant the new apple tree in that, and it would do fine. So even on an apple orchard, they've got, if a tree dies, they got to rotate the soil, not the crop, but the soil. They put new soil in there, and they can grow the same tree back again. Now Napa Valley, I was mentioning, they won't allow you to grow anything but grapes in that valley. So when the grapes get real old, 30, 40 years old, non-productive, rip out the grapevines. They have to let the weeds grow for 10 years. Waste all that time, 10 years before the grape roots disappear totally, and then they can put in new grapes. It's like they could be growing other things for 10 years, but the rules there, you can't grow anything but grapes. And after the grapevines get old, that soil is poison to the grape plant, so they have to let it sit idle for 10 years, and then they can plant grapes again. I guess they grow good flowers.
They can't fumigate it like strawberry guys do.
It's hard to get fumigants. Yeah, so if you're not getting fumigants every year, it's hard to get the permits to get that anymore. But that would be one way around it. But I don't know how good fumigants would work on if you got roots this big and around decomposing, if the fumigant would keep them clean, keep that soil clean very long, because that, eventually the dead stuff would start rotting again, even if you kill the diseases. So if you heat up something real hot, it does render it. If you turn it to charcoal or heat it up real good, it does render it clean. I mentioned that we have charcoal in our top pot. The reason for that is that the rich black soils of the world, and there are some that are considered rich and black, National Geographic had an article about it, said they're black because of the charcoal content. So there was a really hot fire there. Now most things in a fire would just turn to ash, which is potassium primarily left, and everything else goes in the atmosphere. But if you have a big trunk, or if you have an extremely hot fire like a volcanic blast, not enough air to oxidize the trunk or so quickly if it's extreme heat, just turns to charcoal. Charcoal is partially oxidized wood, and charcoal, nothing eats charcoal, so charcoal no longer becomes a disease issue. But charcoal helps collect minerals really well, which is why, and other things, impurities really well, which is why charcoal is used in filters. So, but charcoal makes the ground collect all the minerals that come out of dead things, and it makes the soil really rich. They said if you go to the rainforest, you'll find a patch that's really green. If you dig it up, you'll find remnants of an old campfire underneath there. And they said sometimes these campfires are 10,000 years old. They'll find pottery from 10,000 years ago around this campfire, where they can age the wood and see how old that wood was, 10,000 years old, but that forest is still really green right on top of it. So the black soils of the world are black because of a charcoal content of up to, I think they said, up to 2%. They said it doesn't take much charcoal to make the soil look black. Our top pot is 5% charcoal, which is way overdoing it, but it doesn't hurt anything to have a lot of charcoal in there. So we try to hold more minerals for you because we don't have clay or anything else that holds minerals in it. So the charcoal will help hold the minerals in that soil. So charcoal is like one of the holy grails. If you can make charcoal cheap, because the company told us the charcoal we put in a bag is $50 a cubic foot on the wholesale level. That's how much it costs to make charcoal because of all the energy it takes to make it. If you can make charcoal cheaper, of course they can make it cheaper in China and Vietnam, so they're sending a lot of